A man brought the woman he loved to a place most people would be too ashamed to even mention. Not to humiliate her, not to impress her, but to find out the one thing money had never been able to tell him. Whether she truly loved him, she had no idea what she was walking into. She had no idea what he was hiding, and she had absolutely no idea who he really was. But when the truth finally came out, not quietly, not privately, but in front of everyone, nothing in that office would ever be the same again. Hello friends, welcome. Before we begin, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Also, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Are you watching from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, or somewhere else in the world? We would love to know. And when you finish watching, tell us one thing you learned from the video. It was a warm Tuesday evening in the city of Warri, and a man named Emeka walked slowly through a narrow road he had never once mentioned to anyone at the office. Beside him walked a woman named Adaeze. She matched his pace without complaint, her eyes moving carefully from one side of the street to the other, taking in everything she saw. The road was uneven and cracked. Old compound walls, stained dark gray from years of heavy rain, rose on both sides. Small wooden kiosks sat at the edges, lit by single bulbs hanging from wires. Children chased each other near open gutters. Generators hummed from inside dark parlors. Clothes dried on lines stretched across narrow gaps between buildings. It was the kind of street people passed through quickly on their way somewhere else. It was not the kind of street where anyone expected a man like Emeka to stop and pull out a key, but Emeka stopped, and he pulled out a key. Adaeze had asked him many times over the past months about where he lived. Every time she brought it up, he smiled and moved the conversation gently in another direction. At first she found it amusing. He was a private man, and she respected that. Then she found it curious. Then slowly and quietly, she began to wonder whether he was protecting something, whether there was a part of his life he was not ready to show her. Now standing beside him on this street as he pushed open an old iron gate that groaned under its own weight, she understood that she was about to find out. Emeka glanced at her once as the gate swung open. Then he looked away. His hands were steady. His voice when he spoke was calm. But inside his chest, his heart was doing something it rarely did. It was afraid. This was a man who had sat across the table from difficult people without lowering his eyes. A man who had handled pressure at work without cracking. But walking through this gate beside Adaeze on this particular evening, he felt more exposed than he had in years. Because this was not a business moment. This was not something he could manage or control. This was the moment that would tell him the truth about everything. Adaeze was not the first woman he had brought to this compound. In the months before he met her, Emeka had quietly brought two other women to the same place on two separate evenings. When he had watched their faces with careful attention as they stepped through the gate, the first woman had laughed in a way that was not quite a laugh, and then remembered a phone call she needed to make urgently. She left before they had even sat down. The second woman stayed a little longer. She had been kind about it in the moment, but within a week her messages became shorter and more infrequent until eventually they stopped coming altogether. Neither of them had stayed long enough to ask him a single question about his life. Neither of them had stayed long enough to see the man behind the place, and Emeka had never forgotten either of those evenings. So now, as he stepped into the compound and turned to wait for Adaeze to follow, he was already bracing himself for what usually came next. And the compound was small and carried the look of a place that time had not been kind to. A single fluorescent bulb hung from a wire near the entrance, throwing flat yellow light across the cracked concrete floor. The main building was old. The walls were gray, marked with water lines from old rains, and patches where the plaster had fallen away entirely, leaving the rough blocks underneath exposed. The zinc roof had rusted along the edges and bent slightly at one corner, where a past storm had left its mark. Tall grass had grown thick along the side fence, wild and untidy, the kind of grass that made people walk faster past it in the dark. Emeka stood in front of the door to his room. He unlocked it. He stepped to the side and kept his voice even. "Adaeze," he said quietly, "this is where I live. Welcome." Adaeze did not move immediately. She stood at the entrance and looked inside. The room was small. A foam mattress lay on the floor, pressed close to the wall, and covered with a plain blue bed sheet that had been washed so many times its color had faded. A plastic bucket sat beside the mattress. One wooden shelf was fixed unevenly to the wall, holding a few folded clothes, a small Bible, and a tin of powder. A single bulb hung from the ceiling with no shade. There was no fan, no television, no curtain on the window. The room had nothing beyond what a person absolutely needed to survive, and nothing about it suggested comfort. Adaeze stood at the threshold and said nothing for a long moment. Emeka watched her face. He had learned by now exactly what to look for. The slight shift in the eyes, the careful clearing of the throat, the polite smile that meant something else entirely. He was watching for all of it. He was watching the way a man watches when he already knows what usually comes next and is simply waiting for the confirmation. "Emeka," she said at last, "is this truly where you live?" He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. She looked at him the way you look at someone when the words they have just spoken do not yet match the picture your mind was holding. She had spent months with this man. She had shared meals with him. She had sat beside him through long evenings of quiet conversation. She had known he was a private man, a humble man, a man who never spoke about money and never seemed to need to impress anyone. But she had not imagined this. This was something she had not prepared herself for. "This is why you never answered whenever I asked," she said. Emeka nodded once. He had thought about what he would say in this moment many times before this evening arrived. "I came to Warri without much," he said. "A colleague helped me find this place when I first got here. I have just been managing, doing what I can, saving slowly." Adaze's eyes moved around the room again. She imagined him returning here every evening after work, eating alone in that small space, lying on that mattress in the dark, living this quietly, day after day, without a word to anyone. A slow and heavy feeling settled in her chest. "You should have told me," she said. Emeka looked at the ground. "Why would you keep something like this from me?" she asked. "Did you think I would laugh at you? Did you think I would look down on you because of this place?" He shook his head quickly. "No, that is not what I thought." "And then what were you thinking?" He was quiet for a moment. The generator from a neighbor's house hummed steadily somewhere beyond the wall. Then he spoke. "I was afraid," he said simply. "Afraid of what?" He looked at her. "Of losing you." Adaze's expression changed, not in the way he feared. The firmness in her voice softened, but she was not done. "You should have trusted me," she said. "When someone cares about you, being kept away from something this important is its own kind of pain. It is not a small thing." "I know," Emeka said, "and I am sorry." The compound was quiet around them. Somewhere down the road, a child was calling out to someone. A motorcycle passed slowly in the distance. Emeka stood and watched Adaeze. He was still waiting. He was still watching for the shift, because this was the moment. Why, this was always the moment when things began to change, when the warmth started pulling back, when the questions became fewer and the exits began to form. He had been here before. He knew how this silence usually ended, but Adaeze was not reaching for an exit. She was standing in front of him, steady, her eyes holding his without looking away. And what was in her eyes was not what he had seen in the eyes of the others. It was not discomfort. It was not the careful calculation of a person deciding how quickly they could leave without being impolite. It was something he had not expected, something that looked very much like genuine concern. He stood there for a moment, not entirely sure what to do with that. "Please come inside," he said at last. "Let me go and find us something cold to drink. There is a small shop just at the junction." Adaeze looked once more at the room. Then she nodded. "All right," she said. Emeka stepped out of the compound and walked quickly down the road. His thoughts moved with him. He bought 2 cold drinks from the kiosk at the junction and turned back without wasting time. When he stepped through the gate again, when he pushed open the door and looked into the room, he stopped. The plastic chair was empty. The room was silent. Adaeze was not there. Emeka stood very still in the doorway. He held the 2 drinks in his hands and looked slowly around the room, at the empty chair, at the folded bedsheet, at the door he had just walked through. The room was too small for any doubt. She was not inside it. "She left," he said quietly to himself. The words came out almost calmly, and that calmness was its own kind of sadness. And because he had said those words before, he had stood in a similar kind of stillness before, and let the same quiet understanding settle over him. He had told himself he was ready for this. He had told himself that if it happened again, he would simply accept it and move forward. But standing here now, holding 2 cold drinks bought for a woman who was no longer in the room, he understood that he had not been as ready as he thought. A painful and familiar feeling moved slowly through his chest. Then a voice came from outside. Emeka, where is the bathroom in this compound? He turned so fast he nearly dropped one of the drinks. Adaeze was at the back of the compound. She had stepped outside through the small gap at the side of the building and was standing near the rear wall, peering at the small, separate bathroom with a practical, curious expression. She was not gone. She had simply gone to look around the back of the house. Emeka stood at the doorway and did not speak immediately. She turned when she heard nothing and looked across the compound at him, and then she noticed his face. "Why do you look like that?" she asked. He let a breath out slowly. "I thought you had left," he said. Adaeze stared at him. "Left?" she repeated. "Yes," he said. "When I came back and did not see you inside, I thought you had gone." Adaeze looked at him for a long moment. She was trying to read what was behind his expression. It was more than embarrassment. It was more than relief. There was something underneath both of those things. Something older. Something that had clearly been sitting inside him for a long time before this evening. She walked toward him slowly. "Emeka," she said gently, "do you truly think I am that kind of person?" He looked down. "Honestly," he said, "I did not know what to think. I have seen certain things before. I have been in moments like this before, and they did not usually end well." Adaeze stopped in front of him. She studied his face for a moment, and in that moment, something in her understanding of this man shifted quietly. She had known he was guarded. She had known he was careful with what he shared, but she had not understood until now exactly how much he had been carrying, how much he had already lost, how many times he had stood in a similar place watching someone decide he was not worth staying for. She placed her hand gently on his arm. "Look at me," she said. He looked up. "What I feel for you has nothing to do with this compound," she said. "Not with these walls, and not with this roof, not with any of this." She held his gaze. "I did not come here tonight because of what you own, Emeka. I came here because of who you are." He opened his mouth to speak, but the words did not organize themselves quickly enough. Adaeze continued. "I love you," she said. "Not a version of you. Not a better version of you with a bigger house and a nicer car. You. The man who walks with me and listens when I speak. The man who remembers small things I say. The man standing right in front of me now." The words fell into the air between them and did not fade. Emeka stood very still. He had heard words of affection before in his life. He had not always doubted them, but this moment felt different in a way he could not immediately explain. It felt quieter than the others. It felt like it was not performing anything. He tried to speak again. He started, then stopped, then started again. Adaeze smiled gently. "You do not have to say anything right now," she said. She stepped forward and pulled him into a quiet embrace. Emeka stood for a brief moment before slowly wrapping his arms around her. His chest was tight, not from fear, from something he had not felt in a long time, something close to relief. After a moment, Adaeze pulled back slightly and looked at him. "From now on," she said, "after work, some evenings, I will come here and stay with you for a while before I go home." She looked around the compound once, and then back at him. "This is where you live. That is enough for me." Emeka looked at her, as if the sentence needed a moment to fully arrive. "Here?" he said. "Yes," she said, smiling. "Here." He was quiet. Then a small smile appeared on his face, the first genuine one of the evening. "Come," he said, lifting the drink slightly. "I brought something cold." They went back inside the small room. Adaeze sat on the plastic chair. Emeka sat on the edge of the mattress. They opened the drinks and began to talk the way people talk when they have just passed through something difficult together and have come out the other side. They talked about work. They laughed about things that had happened during the week. They shared small memories from their past. They spoke about food, about family, about the kinds of things people do not usually share until they have decided quietly that the other person is safe. Time passed without either of them keeping track of it. Later that evening, Emeka walked Adaeze to the bus stop at the main junction. When they got there, she turned to face him. "Thank you," she said, "for trusting me enough to bring me here." Emeka looked at her. "Thank you," he replied, "for staying." She smiled. "Good night, Emeka." "Good night, Adaeze." She stepped onto the bus. She turned and waved once before the doors closed. Emeka stood at the bus stop and watched as the bus moved down the road and slowly disappeared around the bend. Then he turned and walked back to the old compound. That night, he lay on the foam mattress and stared at the rusted zinc roof above him for a long time. The room was quiet. The generator from the next compound had been switched off, and the neighborhood had settled into a deep, still silence. Emeka did not immediately close his eyes. He lay with his arm behind his head and let Adaeze's words move through his mind slowly. "I love you." "No, not a version of you. You." He breathed in deeply and let it out. "I love her too," he whispered to himself in the dark. But even as he said it, one thought remained, heavy and patient, waiting at the edge of everything else. What would happen when she finally discovered who he truly was? Emeka was not the man Adaeze believed him to be. He was not a struggling office clerk who had come to Warri with nothing and was doing his best to survive. That story was real in some of its details, but not in the ones that mattered most. The truth was that Emeka was the only son of Chief Obiora, one of the most respected businessmen in the city of Benin. Chief Obiora had built his company from nothing over 40 years and had expanded it across 5 states. His name was known in boardrooms and government offices. His family home was a large compound in one of the quietest and most expensive parts of Benin City. Emeka had grown up inside that compound. He had attended good schools. He had driven good cars. He had never once in his life wondered whether there would be food on the table. And yet here he was, lying on a foam mattress in a one-room apartment in a part of Warri that most people of his background would never visit, pretending to be someone he was not. It had been his father's idea. 18 months before this evening, Emeka had been engaged to a woman named Chisom. She was beautiful and well-spoken, and everyone around him approved of her. He had been certain she loved him. He had been certain he loved her. But 3 months before the wedding, a conversation reached him from a source he trusted. A conversation Chisom had been having with a close friend. In it, she had described her relationship with Emeka not as a love story, but as a calculated decision. She had spoken about the wealth of the Obiora family as though it were the whole point, as though Emeka himself were simply the door through which the wealth was accessed. When the words reached him, something broke quietly in his chest. He called off the engagement without a public argument. He told very few people the real reason, and for months after that, he found it almost impossible to trust his own judgment about people. It was Chief Obiora who had come up with the plan. "My son," his father had said one evening as they sat together on the veranda of the family home, "the problem is not that you cannot find love. And the problem is that wealth keeps getting into the room before the real you does. Remove the wealth from the room, then see who stays." Emeka had thought about it for a long time. Then he had agreed. He transferred to the Warri branch of his father's company under a false role description. He rented the small room. He dressed simply. He spoke carefully. He told no one who he was. And for the first months, the experiment felt manageable. He met people, made quiet observations, and kept his distance emotionally. It was meant to be a study, not a life. But then he met Adaeze. Adaeze had joined the office 4 months after Emeka. She was from Enugu. She was hardworking and direct, and she did not perform warmth for people she did not actually feel it for. She was the kind of woman who said what she meant and meant what she said. Emeka had noticed her almost immediately, not because she was trying to be noticed, precisely because she was not. She came to work and she did her work and she went home and she did not spend her energy on politics or positioning. They had become close slowly. It was not dramatic. It was the accumulation of small, consistent moments. She remembered things he said. He remembered things she said. They fell into easy conversation and easy silence with equal comfort. And somewhere along the way, without a clear moment he could point to, the experiment had stopped feeling like an experiment. Now he was lying on his mattress in the dark, and Adaeze believed he was a man with a foam mattress and a plastic chair, and a future he was building from very little. And everything she had offered him this evening, her kindness, her patience, to her words, she had offered to that man. Emeka sat up slowly in the darkness. He pressed his hands together and looked at the floor. "How do I tell her?" he said quietly to no one. If he told her the truth, she might feel that everything between them had been a performance. She might feel that she had never been given the real choice at all, that while she was being genuine, he had been gathering evidence, and she would not be wrong to feel that. But if he continued to say nothing, the distance between the truth and the story would keep growing, and the longer it grew, the worse the eventual moment of truth would become. He reached for his phone and called his father. Chief Obiora answered after 3 rings. His voice was calm and unhurried the way it always was. "My son, how is everything?" Emeka leaned back against the wall. "Father," he said, "I think I am in a situation." "What kind of situation?" "The kind I did not plan for." He paused. "I met someone. Her name is Adaeze. She came to the office some months ago." Chief Obiora was quiet for a moment. "And what has happened?" "She told me tonight that she loves me," Emeka said, "but she does not know who I am. She thinks I am exactly what I appear to be. A man with very little, doing his best to survive." His father was silent for a few seconds. Then he spoke slowly. "So the test has become something more than a test." "Yes," Emeka said quietly. Chief Obiora considered this. Then he said, "Are you afraid of telling her the truth?" Emeka looked at the dark ceiling. "I am afraid of what the truth will do to what we have built," he said. "I am afraid she will feel deceived. I am afraid that the moment she finds out, when everything real between us will be replaced by something else. Doubt, anger, the feeling that nothing was genuine." His father was quiet again. When he spoke, his voice was measured and gentle. "My son," he said, "I will say something to you, and I want you to hear it properly. Truth is not always comfortable, and love is not always comfortable either. But a love that is built on a foundation that is not true will always carry a crack in it. You can pour water into a cracked vessel every day and still find it empty in the morning." Emeka listened without speaking. Chief Obiora continued, "The woman you are describing, if she is genuine, if what she said to you tonight is real, then she deserves to know the real man she has chosen, not because the truth is easy, but because she earned it the moment she chose you without knowing it." Emeka exhaled slowly. "And if she is angry," he asked, "then she will be angry," his father said simply, "and that anger will be fair. But if her love is real, it will be larger than her anger. Give it time, give her truth, and trust what the two of you have built." The call ended. Emeka set the phone down beside him and sat in the silence of the room for a long time. Outside, a dog barked somewhere down the road, and then was quiet. He would tell her, he decided. Soon. He would find the right moment, and he would tell her. He did not know yet how wrong the timing would turn out to be. In the weeks that followed, Emeka and Adaeze continued to grow closer in the natural, unhurried way of people who have already passed through a significant moment together and have come out of it with something stronger than before. At the office, and they tried to carry themselves normally. They greeted coworkers with the same tone as always. They focused on their work and sat at their desks and completed their duties without drawing attention. But people were not blind. The signs were small but consistent. They arrived at the building within minutes of each other in the mornings. They sometimes left together in the evenings. During lunch breaks, they sat together outside and spoke in low voices over food containers. Colleagues noticed. Some smiled quietly and said nothing. Others made small comments that disappeared as quickly as they were made. But there was one person in the office who was not smiling. His name was Mr. Festus. Mr. Festus was one of the senior administrative officers in the company. He had been with the Warri branch for over 9 years and carried himself with the particular authority of a man who has been somewhere so long he has started to believe the place belongs to him. Junior staff were careful around him. He was not the kind of man who forgot a slight or let a discomfort go unaddressed. He had a way of making his power known through small instructions and sharp comments that accumulated over time into something heavier. He had also, several months before Emeka arrived, expressed interest in Adaeze. He had made it known in the way that men like him sometimes do. Not directly, not vulnerably, but through suggestions and proximity and small demonstrations of what he could offer. Adaeze had been polite. She had also been clear. She was not interested. "Mr. Festus had received that answer without visible reaction and gone back to his desk. But the interest had not disappeared. It had simply turned inward and become something else, something that did not wish Adaeze well and did not wish the people around her well either. When he began to notice the growing closeness between Adaeze and Emeka, something in him tightened. He started finding reasons to summon Emeka. One afternoon, when the office was busy and most staff were at their stations, Mr. Festus looked up from his desk and called out across the room, "Emeka, come here." Emeka looked up from the file he was reviewing. He rose calmly and walked over. "Yes, sir." Mr. Festus pointed to a stack of folders on the corner of his desk. "Take these to the records office downstairs. All of them. Now." Emeka nodded without complaint. "Yes, sir." He gathered the folders and carried them down. When he returned 15 minutes later and sat back down, Mr. Festus called him again almost immediately. "Emeka." Emeka looked up. "Yes, sir." "My water." "Bring it." Emeka went to the small kitchen area, found a bottle of water from the small freezer, and brought it back. Mr. Festus took it without looking at him. Then he said without pausing, "The window in the side office is dirty. Clean it." The room was not entirely silent, but it was the kind of room where people hear things while pretending they do not. Several colleagues glanced briefly and returned their eyes to their screens. Emeka picked up a cleaning cloth and went to the side office. This continued for several days. The tasks were not extraordinary on their own, but they were relentless, and they were deliberate, and they were always delivered with a particular tone, the tone of a man reminding another man of his position. Mr. Festus never said anything that crossed an obvious line. He simply made Emeka feel, through repetition and instruction and small moments of unnecessary authority, that he was tolerated rather than valued. Emeka absorbed it without outward reaction. He completed every task. He responded without aggression. But inside, something was slowly tightening, because he was not a man who had grown up being spoken to this way. He was a man who had learned to lead, not to be diminished. And the effort of holding that back every day was beginning to cost him something. One afternoon, Mr. Festus pushed harder than usual. He had called Emeka over to his desk 3 times in the space of 1 hour. When Emeka returned from the third errand, Mr. Festus leaned back in his chair and looked at him with a slow, deliberate expression. "You think you are somebody important in this office?" he asked. His voice was conversational, as though the words were just an observation. Emeka looked at him calmly. "No, sir," he said. Mr. Festus smiled slightly. "Good, because you are not. You are here because someone allowed you to be here. You should be grateful that you even have a desk." Emeka said nothing for a moment. Then he spoke quietly but clearly. "Sir, I respect you, but I would also ask that you treat me with some respect." The room shifted. It was not a dramatic shift, but it was real. Several people who had been pretending to look at their screens stopped pretending. Mr. Festus's smile disappeared. He sat forward in his chair. "What did you just say to me?" "I said that I respect you," Emeka replied, "and I am simply asking for the same." Mr. Festus stood up. His chair scraped back against the floor. He pointed at Emeka. "You have the audacity to stand in front of me and speak to me like that?" "I did not intend any disrespect," Emeka said. His voice had not risen. "Apologize," Mr. Festus said. "Right now." Emeka held his gaze. "I have nothing to apologize for," he said. Mr. Festus's face changed completely. Before anyone could react, he grabbed the front of Emeka's shirt with one hand and yanked him forward. "Apologize," he said again, loudly now. The room had gone completely still. Every head had turned. Emeka did not swing back. He did not raise his voice. He stood in the grip of Mr. Festus's hand with a stillness that was more unsettling than any reaction would have been. Then a voice cut through the silence. "What is going on here?" It was Adaeze. She had come out of the small side office where she had been working and had stopped in the middle of the room, her eyes moving quickly between Mr. Festus and Emeka. Her expression was not panicked. It was something far more controlled than that. It was the expression of a woman who has identified an injustice and has already decided she will not walk past it. "This is not your business," Mr. Festus said, without releasing Emeka's shirt. Adaeze walked forward. It becomes my business, she said steadily, when I watch someone being treated this way in a place we all share. Let him go. Mr. Festus looked at her. His jaw tightened. Adaeze did not stop. If you do not let him go, she said clearly, I will walk to management's office right now, and I will describe exactly what I have witnessed here this afternoon. Exactly what I have witnessed for days. The room held its breath. Mr. Festus stood there for a moment. He was a man used to having the final word. He was a man used to other people stepping back when he stepped forward. But there was something in Adaze's voice that was not performing. She was not bluffing. And enough people in that room had seen enough in the past weeks to know she meant every word. Slowly, Mr. Festus released Emeka's shirt. He straightened himself. He looked around at the watching faces. Then he sat back down behind his desk without another word. Emeka straightened his shirt quietly. Adaeze came and stood beside him. Are you all right? She asked in a low voice. Yes, he said. She looked at his face for a moment longer to confirm the answer for herself. Then she went back to her office. Emeka returned to his desk. But for the rest of that afternoon, as the office slowly returned to its normal rhythm around him, Emeka could not settle. The incident had not shaken him in the way a physical confrontation might shake someone who is not used to them. What was sitting heavily in his chest was something else. It was the image of Adaeze stepping forward without hesitation, speaking clearly and without any calculation about the cost to herself. Defending a man she believed had no power in that building. Defending him because she believed it was right, not because she knew it was safe. She had done all of that for a man she thought was a struggling office clerk, and she still did not know who he really was. That evening, after the last of his colleagues had filtered out and the office had gone quiet, Emeka sat at his desk for a few minutes before getting up. He walked out of the building and took the long road back toward the compound. The evening air was warm and damp. He walked slowly. By the time he reached the compound and sat down on the edge of the mattress in his small room, his thoughts were in a state he could not easily organize. He had spent weeks telling himself he would find the right moment to tell Adaeze the truth. He had rehearsed versions of the conversation in his mind. He had imagined her face in different ways. He had prepared for different responses. But today had done something to all of that preparing. Because today she had stood in that room and defended him without knowing that the person she was defending had been deceiving her from the beginning. And knowing that, sitting inside that truth, made the secret feel heavier than it had ever felt before. He did not sleep well that night. In the morning, he made up his mind. Today, he decided, today I will tell her. He arrived at the office with that decision sitting clearly in his chest. When Adaeze looked up from her desk and smiled at him, he returned the smile and held it together. You look serious this morning, she said. He nodded. There is something I need to speak with you about. Later, if that is all right. She looked at him with the particular attention she gave things she sensed were important. Of course, she said. Lunch? Lunch, he confirmed. The morning was slow in the specific way mornings are slow when you are waiting for something. Emeka worked through his tasks without being fully present in any of them. He went through folders and answered queries and attended a brief internal meeting, and through all of it, the conversation he needed to have with Adaeze sat in the foreground of his mind like something he was carrying in both hands and could not put down. By the time the lunch hour arrived, the office had begun emptying out. Emeka and Adaeze met near the stairwell and walked together outside to the small area beside the building where they sometimes sat. They had just settled. Emeka turned to face her. Adaeze, he began, there is something I need to tell you, something I should have told you. Emeka. The voice came from behind him. He turned. Mr. Festus was standing a short distance away with a folder in his hand and an expression that carried the particular authority of someone who has decided that the previous day never happened. Those onboarding files from the storage room, Mr. Festus said. Go and get them. I need them now. Emeka turned back to Mr. Festus. I am on my break, he said. I will bring them when I return. Something changed in Mr. Festus's face immediately. He walked forward quickly. Who exactly do you think you are talking to? He demanded. Emeka stood up slowly. I only said I would bring them after my break, he replied. His voice was level. Mr. Festus reached him and grabbed the front of his shirt with both hands this time. Around them, the few colleagues who had come outside to eat had gone still. "You think yesterday gave you courage?" Mr. Festus said loudly. Adaeze was on her feet instantly. She moved quickly toward them. "Stop this," she said sharply. She placed herself close and pushed at Mr. Festus's arm. "Let him go. Right now." Mr. Festus turned and shoved her back with one hand. "Stay out of it," he snapped. Adaeze stumbled a step. Then she squared herself and looked at Mr. Festus with an expression that had gone completely cold. "You just made a very serious mistake," she said quietly. Mr. Festus opened his mouth, but the words never came out, because at that moment, a car door closed somewhere behind them, then another. Several of the senior staff who had been standing near the building entrance went very still. Someone near the door said something under their breath. Someone else took a step backward. 2 black vehicles had pulled into the company premises and stopped. Men in clean, dark clothing stepped out first and positioned themselves with the quiet efficiency of people who do their job without being asked. Then the rear door of the second vehicle opened and an elderly man stepped out. He was dressed in a well-cut agbada, deep blue with a walking stick he did not lean on, but carried with the habit of a man who had carried authority for so long it had simply become part of how he held himself. 2 of the branch's senior staff recognized him immediately. One of them said it in a voice barely above a whisper. "Chief Obiora." Chief Obiora walked into the premises at the measured pace of a man who does not hurry and does not need to. His eyes moved across the building, across the staff, across the scene near the side of the building, where several people had now completely stopped moving. Where his gaze settled on Emeka. Then it moved to Mr. Festus, whose hand was still holding the front of Emeka's shirt. Chief Obiora walked forward. When he reached them, he spoke in a voice that was not raised but filled the space entirely. "Emeka," he said, "what is happening here? I came to review this branch. I came to see how things are being run. Now tell me, what is going on?" The premises had gone completely silent. Every person standing outside, every person who had stepped to a window, every person who had frozen with a food container in their hand or a phone against their ear, all of them were looking, and all of them had heard the same thing. The elderly man with the authority and the vehicles and the staff who had gone pale at the sight of him had just called the office clerk by his name, like a father calls a son. Adaeze stood very still. She looked at Emeka. Her expression was careful, the way expressions are careful when the mind is working quickly and has not yet decided what the face should do. "Emeka," she said softly, "do you know him?" Emeka's heart was moving fast. He had imagined this revelation many times, in quiet rooms, in careful conversations, with gentle explanations already prepared and time allowed for questions. He had never imagined it here, in the open, with half the company watching. Chief Obiora looked at his son with patient authority. "My son," he said again, and this time the 2 words landed like stones dropped into still water. "I asked you a question. My son." The words moved through the premises in whispers that began immediately and spread in every direction. Did he say his son? That clerk? The office clerk is Chief Obiora's son. Mr. Festus stood very still. His hand had released Emeka's shirt at some point during the last few seconds, though he could not have said exactly when. He was standing with his hands at his sides now, and his face had changed in a way that could not be hidden. Everything he had done in the past weeks was replaying itself in the expression of a man who has just understood the full weight of what he has done. Emeka looked at his father. "Father," he said quietly. That was enough. There was no more doubt, no more possibility of another explanation. The room of people outside and at the windows had their answer. Chief Obiora turned his gaze slowly to Mr. Festus. His expression was calm. That was what made it more effective than any display of anger could have been. The absence of anger. The pure, immeasured weight of authority being applied without heat. "What exactly was happening here?" Chief Obiora asked. Mr. Festus tried to speak. "Sir," he said, it was simply a misunderstanding. Between colleagues. Nothing serious." Chief Obiora looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at the people around him. Then he looked back at Mr. Festus. "I watched you from the moment I stepped out of that vehicle," he said quietly. What I observed was not a misunderstanding between colleagues. He paused. In my company, it does not matter who a person's father is or what their family name is. Every person who comes to work here comes with their dignity. That dignity is not negotiable. Not for the most junior staff member, not for anyone. He let the sentence land. Is that understood? Mr. Festus's voice came out very quietly. Yes, sir. Chief Obiora straightened. You are suspended from your duties, he said, until management has had the opportunity to review this matter fully and determine what is appropriate. He looked at him once more. You may go. Mr. Festus stood there for one more second. Then he turned slowly and walked away. Chief Obiora looked around at the other staff briefly. Then he turned to a senior officer who had come outside and asked to be taken to the branch manager's office. He had a full review to conduct and a company to assess. He walked toward the building, and the people near the entrance moved back to give him room. The outside area began to exhale, but Adaeze was not moving. She was standing very still, and her eyes were on Emeka. Only on Emeka. The rest of it, the vehicles, the staff, the suspended mister, now Festus walking away. None of it was in her awareness right now. She was looking at the man she had spent months with, the man she had sat inside a small, worn room with and told that she loved him, the man whose story she had believed completely, the man she had defended in this very compound not 10 minutes ago. She was looking at him, and she was very quietly reordering everything. You, she said. Her voice was low and precise. You are Chief Obiora's son. Emeka could not look away from her. Yes, he said. Adaeze did not raise her voice. That somehow was harder to stand in front of than a raised voice would have been. All this time, she said slowly, all these months, you let me believe you were a man who had come to this city with very little. You showed me that room. You showed me that compound. You described your life to me in a way that made me... She stopped. She pressed her lips together for a moment. Then she continued. That made me feel I understood who you were. Emeka stepped forward. Adaeze, he said. I was going to tell you. I had decided. Today, before we were interrupted, I was trying to tell you. She raised her hand gently. Not a sharp gesture. A quiet one. The kind that says, please, stop. Her eyes were filling. She did not try to hide it. Do you understand what you did? She asked. Her voice was very steady for a voice that was close to breaking. You took away my right to make an informed choice. I was loving a version of you that you constructed. I was making real decisions, real emotional decisions, about a person and a situation that were not real. She paused. And the whole time I was doing that, you were watching me. Emeka said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would be more honest than silence right now. I trusted you, she said, and trust is not a small thing for me. It is not something I give easily. You knew that about me. The area around them had grown very quiet. The few remaining colleagues had found reasons to move elsewhere, sensing instinctively that this was not a moment they should witness. Adaeze stepped back. I need space, she said. She said it quietly and without drama. I need to think. I need time away from this, away from you, until I can understand what I actually feel. She turned, and she walked away. Emeka stood exactly where he was. He watched her go. He did not call after her. He did not move to stop her. Because she was right about everything she had said, and he knew it. And the least he could give her now was the space she had asked for. He stood there until she had gone inside the building. Then he stood there a little longer. Then he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned. His father was standing behind him, having returned quietly from inside. She left, Emeka said. His voice carried nothing extra in it. Chief Obiora gripped his son's shoulder. I saw, he said. He looked at Emeka carefully. Come, let us go. They walked to the vehicles together. When they pulled out of the premises and onto the road, neither of them spoke for a long time. Chief Obiora sat beside his son and looked forward through the windshield. Then he spoke. I owe you an apology, he said. Emeka looked at him. I suggested the plan, his father said. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was giving you a way to find something genuine. But I did not consider fully what it would cost the other person when the truth finally came. I did not think about her, and I should have. He sighed quietly. That was my failure, not yours alone. Emeka shook his head. No, father. The test did what you hoped. She loved me without knowing anything. The test did not fail. Chief Obiora turned to look at his son. But she is gone. Emeka looked out through the window at the city moving past. Yes, he said, but she is gone because she is someone with real standards, someone with real dignity. He paused. That is not a failure. That is exactly the kind of person I was hoping to find. His father was quiet for a moment. Then he said, And what will you do? Emeka said nothing immediately. The vehicle continued. The streets of Warri moved past the windows. Then he spoke. I will wait, he said, and when the right moment comes, I will tell her everything, not to convince her, not to ask her to set aside what she feels, but because she deserves the full truth, all of it, from the beginning. Chief Obiora nodded slowly. They drove on. Across the city, Adaeze was sitting at her desk in the now nearly empty office, and she was not doing any work. She was sitting with her hands folded on top of an unopened folder, and she was staring at a point on the wall that had nothing on it, and she was thinking. She had felt anger first, sharp and immediate, the kind that arrives before everything else has had time to catch up. She had walked back into the building feeling it like a heat in her chest. She had sat down at her desk and opened a folder she did not read, and the anger had moved through her steadily for several minutes. Then it had begun to change. Because anger is a clean emotion. It sits in one place. It has a clear shape. But what was replacing it as the afternoon moved forward was not clean and did not sit in one place. It was layered and complicated, and it kept asking her questions she did not have simple answers to. She thought about the evening in the compound. She thought about the small room with the foam mattress and the single bulb and the plain blue bedsheet. She thought about Emeka standing in the doorway holding 2 cold drinks, his face doing something she had not fully understood at the time, but understood now. She thought about the fear she had seen in him when he realized she had stepped outside. In the particular quality of that fear, the way it was not simple embarrassment, the way it was old. She thought about the months before that evening, the way he had listened to her, the way he had never once made her feel that she needed to be different to be acceptable to him, the way he had been patient with her, consistently, without ever seeming to perform patience, the way he had looked at her in small, unguarded moments when he did not know she was looking back. She thought about the office this afternoon. She thought about standing up without thinking and walking forward and speaking to Mr. Festus without calculating the risk. She had not done that because it was the smart thing to do. She had done it because every part of her that knew right from wrong had simply demanded that she do it. And she had done it for a man who was not what he had told her he was. She sat at her desk for a long time. Then she thought about something else. She thought about the fact that in all the months she had spent with Emeka, not once had he looked at her with the expression of a man conducting a study. Not once had she felt like a subject. She had felt consistently like someone he was genuinely grateful to be near, like someone whose presence meant something real to him. She had learned to read people over the years, and she trusted that reading, and everything that reading had told her about Emeka had said, this man is sincere. The deception had been real. She was not dismissing that. What he had withheld was significant, and it had denied her information she deserved to have. She was not going to set that down as though it were a small thing, but the love had also been real, and those two things were both true at the same time. She picked up her bag slowly. She looked at the unopened folder. Then she stood up and walked out of the office. She had a lot of thinking left to do. A week passed, then another. Emeka had returned to Benin City with his father. He was back in the large family compound, in a room with a proper bed and an air conditioning unit, and a wardrobe full of clothes that cost more than a month of what he had been drawing as a salary in Warri. Everything around him was the same as it had always been. The compound was quiet in the evenings. The food was good. The life was comfortable in every external measurement. None of it reached him. He went through the days with the mechanical efficiency of a man completing tasks. He answered messages from colleagues. He reviewed reports his father needed him to look at. He sat at meals and contributed to conversations. He was to anyone looking fine. But inside, in the place where Adaeze had quietly taken up residence over the past months, there was a stillness that was not peace. He thought about calling her. He thought about it several times a day. He picked up his phone and opened her name in his contacts more than once. Then he put the phone down, because she had asked for space, and he respected her enough to give it without condition. One evening, Chief Obiora came and sat beside him in the living room. "You are still carrying it," his father said. It was not a question. "Yes," Emeka replied, and his father was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have been thinking about the young woman, about what happened." Emeka looked at him. Chief Obiora folded his hands. "I made some inquiries," he said carefully, "about her role and her situation in the Warri branch." He paused. "She is exceptional. Her colleagues speak of her with genuine respect. Her work record is strong. She is someone this company would benefit from having closer to the center of its operations." Emeka watched his father carefully. "I have arranged for her to be offered a position at the headquarters," Chief Obiora said. "A promotion, with proper accommodation provided during her transition." He looked at his son. "Not as a strategy, Emeka, not to manipulate anything, but because she deserves it on her own merits, and because what happened in that branch was partly a result of a situation I created." He paused again. "Whatever happens between the two of you will be between the two of you. But I did not want the cost of this to fall entirely on her." Emeka looked at his father for a long moment. "Thank you," he said quietly. Chief Obiora nodded. "The rest is yours to carry." 3 weeks after the incident at the Warri office, Adaeze arrived at the company headquarters in Benin City. The move had been unexpected. The message from management had arrived with a formality that left no obvious trace of anything personal behind it. It cited her performance and the company's desire to develop staff with her profile. It offered terms that were significantly better than what she had in Warri. She had read it 3 times. She had spoken to her mother about it on the phone for a long evening. Then she had accepted. She told herself the decision was purely professional. She almost believed it. On her first morning at the headquarters, she arrived early and settled into a spacious office that was larger than anything she had worked in before. She arranged her desk the way she always arranged it. She read through the onboarding documents. She was practical and organized, and kept her attention on the work in front of her. Then a message arrived from the chairman's office. It was brief. "Please come to the chairman's office at your earliest convenience." Adaeze sat with the message for a moment. Then she stood up, adjusted her jacket, and walked to the corridor that led to the chairman's wing. She knocked. A voice inside said, "Come in." She opened the door and stopped. Emeka was already there. He was sitting in a chair across the room, and he was standing up as she entered. He had not been expecting her to look exactly the same. Somehow he had imagined the weeks apart might have changed something in how she appeared. They had not. She looked exactly like herself. She looked exactly like the person he had spent the past 3 weeks missing. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Chief Obiora rose from behind the desk. He looked at Adaeze with an expression that was warm and genuine and slightly careful. "Welcome," he said. "Please come in." He looked briefly at both of them. "I have some things to attend to." He walked toward the side door. "I will leave you to speak." The door closed behind him. The office was quiet. The sunlight came through the large windows and lay across the floor in clean, even lines. Emeka looked at Adaeze. He had prepared for this moment in his mind many times. But now that it was here, all the prepared sentences felt insufficient, so he set them aside. "I am sorry," he said. That was all he said first, plainly, without additional framing. Adaeze looked at him. Her face was not closed, but it was not open in the way it used to be. She was here, but she was still somewhere in the middle of her own thoughts about all of it. "You should have trusted me," she said. "I know." He looked at her directly. "I thought I was protecting myself," he said. "After Chisholm, after everything that happened with her, I believed that the only way to know whether someone was genuine was to remove everything that could confuse the picture. Remove the wealth, remove the access, remove all of it, and see who remained." Adaeze listened without speaking. "My father suggested it," he continued, "and it made sense to me at the time. It felt logical. But logic is not the same as wisdom. And what I did not account for was that the person I was testing was also a real person, with her own heart, her own trust, her own right to the full truth of who she was choosing. He paused. I took that from you, and I am truly sorry. Adaeze looked at him for a long moment. She looked at him the way she had looked at him the first time she saw something deeper in his eyes than he intended to show. She was reading him. She had always been able to read him. Then she spoke. I thought about a lot of things in these past weeks, she said. I was angry, genuinely, and I had every right to be. She paused. But I also kept coming back to something. Every moment I can recall between us. The conversations, the evenings, the things you remembered about me, the way you listened. She held his gaze. None of that felt like performance. None of it felt like a man conducting a test and keeping notes. It felt like a man who was falling in love and was frightened of it. Emeka was very still. She continued. The deception was real and it mattered, she said. I will not pretend it did not. But I have been trying to be honest with myself about what I actually know and what I actually felt. And what I know is this. She looked at him steadily. You never treated me like a subject. You treated me like someone you genuinely valued, Emeka said quietly. Because I did, she took a breath. I know, she said. The room held the two of them in its quiet for a moment. Then Adaeze stepped forward slightly. I forgive you, she said. She said it simply and without condition, and without softening it into something smaller than it was. Emeka felt something in his chest release that had been holding itself tightly for 3 weeks. He breathed. Thank you, he said. And then, because it was the truest thing left to say, and he had already told himself he would not hold any of it back anymore. I love you, Adaeze. I have loved you since before I knew what to do with it, since long before that evening in the compound. I love you for exactly who you are, and I am not afraid of that anymore. Adaeze looked at him, and for the first time since she had walked through the door, the careful guardedness in her expression gave way to something simpler. She smiled. Wait, don't ever test my heart like that again, she said. He shook his head. Never, he said. I promise. She stepped closer, and he met her halfway. Several months passed, quietly, in the way that good months pass. Emeka returned to his full role within the company as one of its senior directors, a role he had been preparing for since before the Warri experiment. Adaeze settled into her new position at headquarters with the same steadiness and competence she had brought to everything she had done before. They were no longer keeping their closeness quiet. People knew. People had opinions about it, as people always do. But the opinions of people who were not involved in a thing rarely determined the outcome of it. What determined the outcome was what happened between two people when no one was watching. And what happened between Emeka and Adaeze when no one was watching was this. They built something, slowly, honestly, with the particular care of two people who understand that real things require real tending. One evening in the dry season, Emeka took Adaeze to a restaurant near the river. It was a quiet place. The tables were spread far enough apart that conversation stayed private. A musician played softly near the entrance. The evening air was still and warm, and the river was dark and wide and moved without hurry beyond the windows. They had a long dinner. They talked easily, the way they always talk now, with no subject requiring management and no feelings requiring concealment. Adaeze laughed at something he said, and the sound of it moved through the restaurant like something natural. When then Emeka set down his glass and was quiet for a moment, Adaeze noticed. She tilted her head slightly. What is it? He looked at her, and then he stood up from his chair and without any performance of it, went down on one knee. Adaeze's hand went to her mouth. He opened the small box he had been carrying for 2 weeks. A ring sat inside it. Simple. Precise. The kind of thing chosen by someone who paid attention to the person they were choosing it for. He looked up at her and spoke. Adaeze, he said, you loved me when you believed I had nothing. Not as a theory. In practice. You sat in a small, worn room with a foam mattress and a single bulb, and you told me that where I lived had nothing to do with what you felt. You stepped forward for me in front of people without stopping to calculate whether it was safe to do so. See, you defended my dignity when you did not know I had the power to defend my own. He paused. Do you understand what that means to a person? To a man who has spent years surrounded by people who love the circumstances around him rather than the man inside them? Adaeze's eyes were bright. You gave me something I had stopped believing I would find, he said quietly. Someone who saw me, not the company, not my father's name, not the house or the vehicles or any of it. You saw me, and you chose me. He took her hand. I do not want to walk through this life choosing who to be careful around. I want to walk through it beside someone I can be completely honest with, someone I trust entirely. He looked at her. That person is you. That has always been you. He took a slow breath. Will you marry me? Adaeze looked at him for a moment. But her eyes were full. She did not make him wait. Yes, she said. Emeka, yes. I will marry you. He slid the ring onto her finger and rose and pulled her into an embrace that was quiet and total. Around them, the few other guests who had watched it unfold smiled and offered soft applause. The musician near the entrance played a little more warmly. The river outside moved on in the dark, but Emeka was not aware of any of it. He was holding Adaeze and she was holding him, and in that small moment, everything else was simply background. 3 months later, the wedding took place in Benin City. Chief Obiora had wanted something grand. It was Emeka who had asked for something meaningful instead. And in the end, they had found a version of the day that held both things at once. The hall was beautiful. The decorations were chosen with care. And the food was the kind that made people remember the occasion long after the details had blurred. Friends came. Family came from several states. Colleagues from the company filled an entire section of the hall. Adaeze's mother sat in the front row and watched her daughter walk forward with an expression that required no interpretation. Emeka stood at the front of the hall and watched Adaeze come toward him and felt something that he did not immediately have a word for. It was not simply happiness, it was something older and quieter. It was the feeling of arriving at a place you did not know you were looking for until you were standing in it. They exchanged their vows. They exchanged their rings. They were announced as husband and wife. Across the hall, Chief Obiora sat with his hands folded and watched his son. Well, he had built many things in his life. Companies, properties, connections that stretched across the country. He had negotiated across tables for decades and had walked away from those tables with things other men could not obtain. But watching Emeka stand beside Adaeze in that hall, watching the expression on his son's face, Chief Obiora understood with perfect clarity that the best thing he had ever been part of was not any of that. It was this quiet, honest, hard-won moment between two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and had chosen each other in the most genuine of ways. And it was real, not performed, not calculated, not based on wealth or position or any of the things that money can purchase. It was simply real. My wonderful friends, and every person carries inside them a deep desire to be loved, not for what they have, but for who they are. That desire is not weakness. It is the most human thing about us. Emeka went to extraordinary lengths to find it, and Adaeze, without knowing she was being tested, passed simply by being who she already was. She was kind when kindness was not required. She was loyal when loyalty was not expected. She stayed when leaving would have been easier. That is the kind of love that lasts. Not because it is perfect, but because it is real. Now I want to hear from you. Adaeze discovered that the man she loved had been hiding a significant truth from her for months. She felt betrayed. She needed space. But in the end, she forgave him and chose to stay. Here is my question for you. Was Adaeze right to forgive Emeka? Or do you think a deception like his, no matter the reason, is something that should end a relationship? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every single one, and I would genuinely love to know what you think. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you have not yet subscribed to Dynasty of Heart Stories, now is the perfect time. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. A powerful new video is coming very soon. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.